According to countless eyewitness reports now, New Jersey has recently been the site of an unusual rash of drone activity, with unexplained drones ranging in size from small commercial quadcopters to platforms so big there could potentially be a pilot on board, zooming through the skies of New Jersey and surrounding states with no apparent answers as to where they come from, who's operating them, or whether or not they pose a risk to national security or the people living down below. But as interesting as this mystery genuinely is, it's been overshadowed in a lot of digital spaces by another phenomenon that, like drones, has been an ever-growing part of our day-to-day lives since the onset of the digital revolution. And that is the internet hyperbole machine. With every social media platform flooded with videos of commercial airliners, helicopters, hobby drones, and special effects forgeries, it's easier than ever to convince yourself that New Jersey is more than the site of an unusual rash of drone sightings, and is instead where the US is secretly trying to find a lost nuclear weapon, or where Iran is launching a drone invasion from a ship parked just off the coast, where China is testing America's drone defenses over, well, New Jersey, or maybe even the site of a very slow and steady beginning to an alien invasion. In the absence of clear answers, we have a knack for creating them ourselves, and in a digital environment that financially incentivizes only the most engaging, shocking, or controversial content, those invented answers can seem substantiated by countless Reddit threads, Twitter posts, TikToks, YouTube videos, and maybe in some egregious cases, by lawmakers taking advantage of an opportunity to get their names in the headlines. So let's talk about these drones over New Jersey and the genuinely fascinating mystery that's unfolding over our heads. But let's also temper our expectations, because anyone promising to have all the answers right now is, well, part of the problem. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Air Power. A recent investigation led by Yale University has concluded that the Russian government has enacted a large-scale kidnapping and forced adoption program for Ukrainian children, tracking hundreds of kids stolen from their families in Ukraine and then put up for adoption inside Russia. And like so many stories like this, I've been staying on top of it using Ground News. Ground News is an aggregator that collects news stories published by outlets all around the world and then places them all into a single easy-to-read feed, making it easy to not just stay on top of what's going on, but also to poke a hole through the bias and even the disinformation that can be commonplace in today's media environment. Right here on Ground News, I can see that despite this being a developing story, 112 outlets have already covered it. And there are already differences in how that coverage is manifesting based on political sphere. Left-leaning outlets have been more reserved in the language they use, running headlines like Russia's Putin implicated in forced removals of Ukrainian children, whereas so far right-leaning outlets have been much more direct, running headlines like stolen Ukrainian children put up for adoption on websites funded by Putin. Ground News even makes it easy to see who owns a news outlet and whether or not they're government affiliated. And I love the Ground News For You tab that allows me to pick categories that I'm interested in, and then it'll give me a curated list of news articles that fit those interests. Ground News is an invaluable part of my day-to-day news consumption and my research, and I think you'll love it too. In fact, I can get you a great deal. Between now and the end of the year, I can get you 50% off the same Vantage plan that I use by just going to ground.news/sandbox with 2 X's or by following the link in the description below. Again, that's ground.news/sandbox with 2 X's to get 50% off their Vantage plan that'll help you stay on top of things. Now, I want to be clear for those of you who are here looking for an in-depth technical analysis of the drones that are flying over New Jersey, that I can't give that to you. I don't know any more about these drones than anyone else, and the claims surrounding these sightings range from the positively mundane to the borderline crazy. And the only way we could cover all of that would be to discuss, Well, pretty much every drone system that's ever been developed, and several that haven't been fielded yet. So instead, I want to talk about how we can sift through all the information we're being flooded with to try to draw our own conclusions, and provide you with a little bit of educated insight along the way. So let's start at the beginning. This latest rash of drone sightings over New Jersey began in mid-November, in the week leading up to Thanksgiving, and the first of these drones spotted flying over a U.S. military installation came at around that same time, with security at the U.S. Army's Picatinny Arsenal first reporting drones flying over their base on November 13th. Since then, hundreds, if not thousands of sightings have been reported to law enforcement or posted online, but unfortunately, that's also when the waters started getting very muddy. Since then, drones have been spotted over more than a dozen New Jersey counties, as well as over Pennsylvania, New York, and elsewhere. In fact, a subreddit set up to track drone sightings live as they're reported has since been flooded by sightings from all around the globe. Descriptions of New Jersey's drones vary wildly, with some said to be quadcopters of the sort you might buy at a big box retailer, and others bearing a stronger resemblance to flying cars, with the size to match. And if you search any social media platform for videos of these drones, you'll find no shortage of clips showing, well, usually blinking lights against a black background, but sometimes you'll see stuff a lot more interesting than that. But before you can make any headway diving into the most interesting sightings, we need to discuss the much larger volume of videos and reports that don't seem out of the ordinary at all, shared or reported by people who seemingly haven't spent much time looking up before. In many circulating videos, you can clearly see the red, green, and white lights legally required for aircraft operations at night, suggesting the platforms shown are at least adhering to the law in that regard, which in itself points to a distinctly terrestrial source, and more than that, one that's willing to expose the presence of its drones in order to avoid collisions or the legal ramifications of violating the law. And to that point, many of the videos I've seen that clearly show these navigation and anti-collision lights are pretty clearly commercial aircraft flying just the same way they always have. In one video posted by a young woman in New Jersey, which I'm probably not going to show on the screen because I don't think she meant to mislead anyone, she talks about how the drones are back before panning up to show what is clearly a commercial passenger jet zooming by, with the distinctive sounds of its turbofan engines enveloping the sky. She even says some of these drones are so big, they don't even sound like drones anymore. The truth is, while there are certainly unusual and unexplained drones flying over New Jersey, the number of legitimately concerning or mysterious drone sightings has been vastly eclipsed by these sorts of reports, as people who have been primed by news reports and social media posts about these drones have started looking up in hopes of spotting something unusual themselves. Of course, that's easy for me to say from the drone-free airspace of my home in Tennessee. And while I've spoken directly to several people in New Jersey about the drones that they've seen, I don't expect you to just take my word for it on that. So let's look to Joshua Tan, a professor of physics and astronomy at LaGuardia Community College in New Jersey. According to Tan, while some sightings may be the real deal, others are informed by confirmation bias, as people hear reports of drones and start looking for them themselves. I'll quote the professor now. People are just not familiar with what's in the sky generally because they're just not normally looking up in the sky. There are other things in the sky that have been in the sky at night for a long time. Planes, helicopters, stars, planets, things that are very bright that people don't necessarily know what they're looking at. And of course, it's also important to consider the number of real, actual, genuine drones that people are seeing that are just real, actual, genuine drones people are operating within the confines of the law. If you see a group of quadcopters flying over New Jersey after hearing all of these reports, your first instinct will be to, well, assume that it's part of the mystery, when in reality, you not knowing who's flying those drones is not the same as those drones being mysterious. As one good example, the Sheriff's Department in Ocean County, New Jersey, has been operating its own drones at night since these reports began, using them to try to help uncover the mystery behind the truly unexplained sightings. According to Sergeant Kevin Fennessy, the officer in charge of the department's drone unit, the unexplained drones that they've been after have been about twice the size of their quadcopters and seem to be capable of achieving speeds about 20 miles per hour faster than their drones can manage. And when they do get a chance to chase one of these mysterious drones, the drones turn off their navigation lights, making them all but impossible to follow through the darkness. Now, to the uninformed observer simply going about their day with an eye toward the sky, the drones being operated by the police, just like drones being operated by hobbyists and other lawful operators, look the same against the inky darkness of the sky as those that are genuinely mysterious. And make no mistake, there are people in New Jersey who are operating their own drones legally. In fact, there may even be more than usual. One person I spoke to in New Jersey who'd seen dozens of drones fly over his house in the past few weeks even dusted off his old quadcopter. Not because he wanted to get in on the fun, but because all this talk about drones just reminded him that he had one collecting dust. And then, of course, you have the grifters. People who intentionally share fake or wildly out of context videos and pictures because they know it's a great way to drive engagement and accumulate more follows or likes or Reddit karma or ad revenue. One video that was on the front page of the popular UAP subreddit RUFOs last night was titled, "Drone Appears to be Firing a Weapon, Bergen County, New Jersey," and showed one such alleged drone shooting silent laser beams, accompanied by the mostly ignored and practically satirical caption, "My brother just sent me this. He said a friend sent it to him. He got it from another friend who claims their dad took the video in Bergen County, New Jersey." I've been seeing these things all over where I live in New Jersey, but haven't seen anything like this. And to my utter disappointment, the top comments under that video were not people calling out the poster for sharing the video with that title, despite openly having no idea if it was real or even where it was recorded. And this is why we can't have nice things. Because in the onslaught of drone reports, claims, news articles, threads, videos, and more, our brain can't easily identify which things we scroll past are this kind of nonsense and which are actually anomalous. But to be clear, government officials are also to blame for what I would not call hysteria, but I think it might be fair to call paranoia. Between inconsistent messaging from military and law enforcement spokesmen, officials answering questions about a topic and a technology that they have a tenuous grasp of at best, and some lawmakers making baseless and sensational claims about adversary nations, the people Americans are counting on to dispel nonsense and provide concrete answers are instead exacerbating concerns at best and fueling the flames of conspiracy theorists at worst. On Thursday, for instance, White House National Security Advisor Admiral John Kirby drew the ire of many New Jersey lawmakers when he issued a statement about the recent rash of drone sightings. I'll quote Kirby now. "We have no evidence at this time that the reported drone sightings pose a national security or a public safety threat, or have a foreign nexus." He went on to say, "Upon review of available imagery, it appears that many of the reported sightings are actually manned aircraft operating lawfully. There are no reported or confirmed drone sightings in any restricted airspace." Kirby concluded by saying, "To be clear, they have uncovered no such malicious activity or intent at this stage. While there is no known malicious activity occurring in New Jersey, the reported sightings there do, however, highlight the insufficiency of current authorities." Now, this obviously got a lot of people riled up, as Kirby claimed the drone sightings had not entered into any restricted airspace, when in truth, this event really started getting national attention when the Army reported drones flying over their installation. To many, this apparent falsehood was clear evidence of a government cover-up. And to be clear, I can't explain why Kirby would land so far off the mark, but I do think that it's important to consider Kirby's choices in language in this statement. For instance, Kirby's claim that there's no evidence that these drones have malicious intent or pose a threat was a politically unpopular one, but was an important point to clarify. One New Jersey mayor, Sam Morris, said it was insulting to suggest these drones aren't a threat when no one seems to know anything about them. Others, like Senator Richard Blumenthal, a Democrat from Connecticut, has been quoted as saying these drones should be shot down if necessary. And lots of people all over the internet have similarly been wondering why the US military hasn't been shooting these drones down or bringing them down with jammers. Now, in a previous video about a similar drone event over Arlington, Virginia last December, we talked about how the US military's legal authority to engage things like drones over US soil is severely limited, meaning Uncle Sam's gun clubs can't just start shooting anything down over American airspace just because it's mysterious, especially when it's operating within the confines of the law. We also talked about ongoing debate over who has jurisdiction with things like this, whether it's local law enforcement, federal law enforcement agencies, or the US military. And notably, according to US Northern Command, who is responsible for US Homeland Defense, there has yet to be any official request out of New Jersey for their support in this investigation thus far. By law, the military can only shoot down a drone if it poses an imminent threat, and that's exactly why Kirby chose the language he did. A mystery in the absence of other evidence is not in itself a threat that warrants a kinetic solution, and to be clear, that's a policy we should want the military to have. The primary defensive systems the US military uses against drone threats are, by their very nature, dangerous. Weapons like Raytheon's Coyote, itself a UAV, bring down enemy drones by flying straight into them and detonating 4 pounds of high explosives. Larger interceptors, like those employed by the Patriot air defense systems, sometimes carry literally hundreds of pounds of explosives. Not only would shooting drones down over New Jersey result in lots of dangerous debris potentially falling in residential or commercial areas, but a miss could result in a PAC-2 interceptor delivering 200 pounds of high explosives straight into someone's living room. And while jamming would be a better option, it also comes with some real concerns. Using military-grade jammers to down drones over New Jersey would affect a long list of systems beyond the mysterious and unlawfully operated drones we're after, including legal drone operations, but potentially extending out into other unrelated facets of society, like first responder communications, GPS, and more. That's not to say that jamming can't be done, but it is meant to highlight how second and third order effects of kinetic and passive anti-drone operations have to be considered, and the risk those options present must be weighed objectively against the risk these drones seem to pose. And while it's certainly understandable that the presence of these drones would make people uneasy, that in itself is not a larger threat than bringing down 911 call centers with a jammer or lobbing high explosives at low-flying drones over residential areas. In other words, being frustrated with the government, with the military, with lawmakers, with everybody is appropriate and just fine, but it's also worth considering the complex variables in play. And with those variables in mind, I'm inclined to lean into Hanlon's razor on this one. Now, Hanlon's razor is a philosophical tool we can use to help us draw reasonable conclusions, and it basically says never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by incompetence. Or to put it another way, it's just more likely that the government's doing a crappy job of communicating with the public and maybe even with managing this event as a whole than it is that all of these officials are involved in some malicious conspiracy to cover up an Iranian invasion or a missing nuclear weapon or shape-shifting alien spaceships, or you get the idea. Now, as we've discussed in the past, this rash of drone sightings over New Jersey is not without precedent, as previous and as yet unexplained swaths of drones have been spotted operating much like this over Virginia, Nebraska, Colorado, Kansas, California, and the UK in the past few years, some in just the past few months. And as with those previous events, the truly mysterious drones operating over New Jersey appear to be much larger and much more expensive than you would find in the hands of even the most avid hobbyist. And at least in previous incursions, the drones also seem to be operating with a high degree of coordination and working toward an unclear but nonetheless present objective. And while we can't say for sure exactly what models of drones are flying, and as such, what their technical limitations and capabilities may be, starting at those potential objectives and working our way backward may help us to identify some of the more likely sources of these drones, and just as importantly, may help us dismiss some of the less likely ones. So let's start with espionage. Depending on the sensors and avionics on board, drones can be used to gather a wide variety of intelligence, from good old-fashioned photographs to soaking up radio transmissions for further analysis. And while this is a potential explanation for these drones, I'd call it unlikely. Espionage is, by its very nature, secretive, not just because you want to be able to gather information effectively, but because you want to be able to reuse effective intelligence gathering techniques, resources, or equipment again in the future. Often, intelligence is classified not just because of the contents of the intel, but because revealing the information could expose the assets, the equipment, or the personnel that you used to gather it. So if you're a foreign adversary, you have to weigh the benefit of whatever intelligence you might gather with these drones against the extreme degree of exposure flying dozens of drones with lit navigation lights over the continental US would garner. As we're seeing, it not only draws a lot of attention, but would also prompt corrective action within the military and law enforcement to prevent this from happening again. And that means you're effectively burning your fancy new drone intelligence collecting systems. But what about some of the more wild explanations we've seen floated, like the idea that the US government is using these drones to search for a missing nuclear weapon in New Jersey, or the idea that these drones are actually after truly anomalous UAP that are also operating in the area, or even the idea that they're not drones at all, but are rather shape-shifting alien spacecraft that are trying to fool human observers. Well, to be clear, I can't outright disprove any of these claims, but I can offer another philosophical tool, another razor, that can help us dismiss them as mostly unlikely. And that one is Occam's razor, which suggests the conclusion that requires the fewest assumptions, especially baseless ones, is probably the right one. Aliens, nuclear weapons, and other similarly sensational stories all require long lists of evidenceless assumptions, like the assumption that a nuclear weapon has secretly gone missing, or the assumption that alien life has traversed the cosmos to overfly New Jersey with spaceships that can transform into quadcopters. I won't say that these things are impossible. I suppose anything's possible in this universe, but I will confidently assess them to be unlikely. But these wild explanations do point towards something important, and that is that because of how anomalous this whole situation is, whatever the explanation will also be similarly abnormal. Or in other words, weird and unusual explanations are totally warranted here. We just have to look for the ones that require the fewest assumptions. And that leads me to just a handful of likely explanations in my admittedly subjective opinion, each with the caveat that not all of the drone sightings can be attributed to a single source, and some reported sightings are all but certainly legally operated drones or other misidentified aircraft. But those big, expensive mystery drones are, in my opinion, likely either operated by Defense Department or law enforcement red teams, or by a corporation that's either demonstrating or maturing their drone technologies and capabilities. Now, we spoke at more length about red teams in my previous drone video, and I recommend you check it out. But suffice to say, red teams are groups tasked with identifying and highlighting vulnerabilities in existing policy, practice, procedure, equipment, personnel, and more. Red teams can be found at just about every level of the military, all throughout the government and the corporate world, and they manifest in lots of different ways, but the goal is always mostly the same: to find a problem and prompt a solution. And one could argue that is what's going on here, as not only have these drone events prompted lots of discussions about the drone threat, some of which I was a part of during my recent visit to NORAD, and on December 5th, the Defense Department announced a new force-wide strategy for countering drone systems. That's exactly the sort of stuff that happens when red teams identify vulnerabilities. Now, red teams are admittedly not usually anything close to this disruptive, but it has happened in the past, and the only real assumption we need to make here is that something that we know is happening in some places, and that certainly has happened before, may be happening now in New Jersey. It would be an unusual explanation, but then any explanation for an unusual event will often be unusual itself. The second, and I would argue maybe more likely explanation, is a corporation developing or maturing drone technologies. The fact that these drones are, for the most part, adhering to the law, but thus far no one has claimed responsibility for them, might point to a company developing or testing systems that they don't want revealed to the public just yet, either for commercial or government contracting reasons. Again, that is not something without precedent. After all, the B-21 Raider's first unannounced test flight took place over Palmdale, California, as have many others. If you're based in New Jersey, testing your systems over New Jersey to some extent just makes sense. These drones could be developing swarm logic, maturing real-time mapping capabilities, or any number of other objectives that may require accumulating lots of flight time. And with so many drones in public hands all throughout the US, they may have believed they could complete their testing without drawing too much attention. But to be honest, I think the most likely explanation is not any one explanation at all. Some of the things people have spotted have been airplanes. Others have been hobby drones. Others may be law enforcement drones, while still others may be, as we've seen several times now, Chinese spies using off-the-shelf drone technology to get a closer look at American military installations. A small number of the reports may be swarms of new systems being developed or tested by corporations in the area, and some others may just be punk kids with quadcopters trying to get in on all this drone frenzy fun. Some of the posts you see online are fake, others are genuine but explainable, and a small fraction of them are really, really weird. But we're never going to find real answers if we continue to prioritize the most sensational claims and attack those who attempt to present reasonable explanations. Because at this point, the drone invasion over New Jersey has evolved into two separate stories. One is about some genuinely mysterious and interesting drones that seem to be too big and too expensive to be flying around New Jersey without any good explanation. But the other is about how the attention-based media economy has turned many news outlets and even individual content creators into grifters who stir fear and frenzy as a reliable means to line their pockets. So what are people seeing in the skies over New Jersey, and now all over the world? Well, I'm confident in my assessment that many of these sightings are just hobby drones and quadcopters being operated by hobbyists. Some others may well be commercial platforms, and some may be experimental drone systems that have not been revealed to the public. But a huge portion of them are just misidentified regular conventional aircraft, commercial airliners, helicopters, and the like. And to prove my point, I'll admit to you now that while about half of the footage I've used in this video, half of the clips have been from New Jersey, or at least are alleged to be, and really show these drones people have been seeing. But the other half of the clips I've shown in this video are just commercial air traffic flying in and out of the Chattanooga airport that I recorded myself on my cell phone last night. And the fact that you probably can't tell which ones are mine and which ones are alleged to be these New Jersey drones should tell us a great deal about just how much this has been blown out of proportion. But to be clear, there have indeed been several reports of large, exotic, and unusual-looking drones that are far too expensive to be operated by hobbyists, and as such, must come from someone with deep pockets. With off-the-shelf quadcopters ranging in price from hundreds to tens of thousands of dollars, these much larger, much longer-ranged platforms likely cost in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, and almost certainly also come with a fair bit of operating costs. And those deep pockets suggest a fairly short list of suspects, really either governments or corporations. And because I think foreign involvement is unlikely, that really leaves the American government, whether some small facet of it or a larger agency, or corporations, both of which are prone to secrecy, can be dishonest, and tend to be large enough that the left hand does not always know what the right hand is doing. But determining what part of the government or what corporation may ultimately be funding these drone exercises can really only be done after we dismiss the sillier aspects of this discourse. I'm not here to tell you that aliens aren't real, or that the US government never lies to you, or that conspiracies never happen, but I am here to say that a lack of evidence pointing toward a common everyday solution is not the same as that evidence pointing toward an otherwise otherworldly one. The US government keeps secrets. The Defense Department is constantly testing new technologies, including drone technologies, and there's a long list of corporations based in the United States competing with one another to field new drone tech for everything from delivering Amazon packages to ferrying passengers from here to there. And if we can all agree on all of that, well then, the conclusions that require the fewest assumptions are probably the right ones. And what we're seeing in the airspace over New Jersey is Americans doing American things, whether for the US government or Anduril or Lockheed Martin or some other company. But there are, of course, other possibilities, and I'll be keeping my eyes open and my ears to the ground. But you better believe that any conclusion that I entertain will need to be based on real evidence, and I encourage you to do the same. And with that ends this short fuse edition of Air Power from Sandbox News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and motivation from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below, and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandbox News.